Beloved star, warmest welcome to Elven Pod episode 74. And this one, I'd love to talk about an experience I've been having over the last week. We're in an incredibly strong time. I feel that we are changing completely. We're at this resurrection point of the cycle that overlays with Easter, with that passageway. And it's something that is, well, we could see it as an external event and something that is reflected in a religion and in something that happened to one being, to Yeshua, to Jesus, that has affected so many of us and been part of so many of our narratives. It's also, while being an incredible collective experience for many human beings all around the world, it's also something that is intimate and internal and very much within each one of us as the Christ light of our own becoming and our own soul star cycle of becoming, of shifting into walking this earth in our immortal starlight, in our oversoul presence. Now that is an extraordinary and a vast process. That is the process of our ascension. It's also natural. It's happening within the heart of nature, within every cell of our beings. And it's something that has its own intelligence and its own momentum. And that in many ways we can simply continue to affirm our devotion to you. Once we come to know this bandwave of our ascension, once there is this intimate link of its becoming and its momentum, its sensation within, it is something that we can affirm our devotion to, that we can say yes to over and over again, that we can choose and affirm in our being that that is our choice. And that's I've found that's one of the most powerful things that I can do, is that repeated affirmation within myself, which opens up the surrender to a much greater process than I personally feel in control of or all knowing of. But I do know the sensation of the conscious choice and the alignment to that intelligence, to that becoming. And so with this, what I'd just love to share is the experience that I've had over the last week, which was really, really interesting and not always easy to experience by any means. But there was a few days, about 3 or 4 days last week, where I found that ever increasingly there was this sadness within me and an experience of sorrow. And it wasn't to do with any one thing. I couldn't say it was caused by this, or this is what's really rising up in my consciousness. This is coming forward. It's this sorrow, this strand of my being, this strand of my experience. It wasn't locatable in any way like this. And while I've experienced, as with so many of us, much of my journey has been through loss, and it's been through sorrow, and it's been the incredible heart opening and the surrender to love through the cycles and the process of repeated loss of things that I thought I was, or a dream that I thought I was and thought I wanted, thought I walked within, that would turn out to be many layers, if you like, of the soul karma or soul patterns and fractals of consciousness that I've chosen to, if you like, embody, and that are part of the age that is passing. And that I've been in the process of awakening within them and becoming awake to the fact that they're not my essence, that they're not the light of my soul star and that which I am for this dawn. And so there's been many layers of then deep release and deep letting go. And what I've come to learn at every phase of that has been that that experience of letting go, while that could seem so super exciting, to let go of that which is going to call you into becoming the light, this liberated light of the source radiance that you are, there is also, I've found, sorrow at every phase of that, because it's a letting go. And whether it's been a cycle of restriction, of oppression, of something that is a cycle I've given expression to that brings me suffering, even so in the shedding of that parameter, that there is sorrow, there is loss. And so I have become familiar with that and walked that cycle many, many times over and been willing to feel, really willing to feel. But this one was a different kind of experience. And I noticed that as the days passed, I was becoming worried. A part of me was becoming afraid because it was carrying on and it was reminding me of old experiences of depression and of a sadness that when I was younger would go on and on and on, and that I had no idea where it was coming from and no sense of that I could bring it to any end, or that I had any wisdom around why it was there or how I could work with it. And what was so interesting to me was to recognize and become conscious of this old strand of the fear of sadness, the fear of my own sadness inside me. And as I say, well, parts of me have moved beyond that when it's maybe a shorter spell of sorrow or something I can locate to something specific. But this more sustained experience brought up a layer and a sense of a part of me that is afraid of my own sorrow. And I feel in my heart that's not just myself experiencing that is a very human experience, to not just to experience sorrow, but also to experience fear of the depth or the extent or the length of the sorrow that we can experience. And a sense of helplessness at times. What is this? What to do with this? And in that fear, that can generate a resistance. Out of that fear, we can generate a resistance. And what I noticed, so I sat with this because it wasn't going away and I needed to be present with it. You know, it was calling me back again and again. There was no easy out with this. And so I witnessed a lot of different layers of experience and ways of experiencing the sorrow. And it's this I'd love to share in this pod, because it became, and it's become part of my own, if you like, that resurrection cycle of this passage, this Easter passage that we've been through and we're moving through. And so at the level of resisting the sorrow from this fear of this experience, the sorrow became painful. It's like in that place, the sorrow becomes really, really painful, and became for me something that I was also starting to almost build a sense of self from, like start seeing myself or build stories about myself in relation to this sorrow. And I noticed that in that state, it's almost as though part of me was hovering outside it, like resisting, standing outside, afraid to really experience this. So in noticing that, I, through those days, began to drop into, just inviting myself into over and over again, really to release that resistance and let myself just experience it. Not to try to clear it, not to think, oh my gosh, yes, this is something now I can clear and in 10 minutes time I'll be, free and joyful again. But just to actually answer the call to presence in the heart of this sorrow. So with that, I noticed that the sensation of it started to migrate and change quite significantly. And it's as though the sorrow within me no longer being so painful, but becoming more luminous or translucent as a movement of the soul, and a sense of it as a movement of the soul, and a sense of this movement of the soul within me being a profound release at this time, like a deep, deep letting go of old layers of ways of protecting myself, of ways of limiting or censoring the parameters of the experience I have upon this earth. And that there were and there are such huge aspects of the way that I've allowed myself to experience multidimensionality here, and the way that I've placed limit upon that in my body, that are right now in a process of, and have been in a process of, releasing. So I spoke in the last pod of the liberation of the senses, of our higher dimensional senses in our body, inner dimensional senses, which correlate, they are just another part of the stream which leads into our physical senses. that those are recalibrating to the level where the body, through the senses, inner and physical, is actually attuned to the sensory stream of our soul star information, of our seventh dimensional and beyond information, inspiration, ideas, guidance of ourselves as source, as that star creator. So it's a much more embodied experience of multidimensionality. It's the body knowing itself as multidimensional, which is the big, big shift of this year in the Elven view. So what I felt and realized was that my sorrow at its cleanest level, when I let it be, it was actually this movement in my soul of this profound ending. The ending, which I saw as I experienced it as a morphing within my biological genetics that's actually been taking place through aeons, away from that multidimensionality into a much narrower bandwave. And the censorship, the seals, the protection, the coding that limited that down to a very survival-based level of sensing within the physical body. And that the morphing of that genetic code is something that goes, say, way beyond this lifetime. Very physical, cellular, biological, genetic DNA level stuff, changing so profoundly. And this sorrow was reflective of, and at its purest level, part of that movement deep within my being as that was letting go. And that's what's so extraordinarily paradoxical about sorrow, because it doesn't always distinguish between whether an experience was good or bad, difficult or enjoyable, easy or hard. It doesn't distinguish. It's like a dear member of my family, has been in care for a long time of an elderly parent, and that took up every moment of their waking existence and involved so much self-sacrifice, putting aside of their own needs. And yet with the ending of that role, and of course, as the parent passed, of course, the grief for that parent leaving this earth, but also for the loss of this role, for the loss of this way of being, as challenging as it was, and as suppressive as it was for that person because of the life conditions of so much of who they were. There was so much they couldn't be while needing to play that role. But this, so we were really talking about, wow, isn't it so fascinating how our beings at some levels, when it comes to sorrow, they don't distinguish between whether an experience was hard or easy, really enjoyable or really unpleasant. All of these kind of different ranges we have and ideas when it comes to that sorrow, that grief, that movement in the soul, that is essentially the migration, the movement from one level of expression to another. So I believe that as we get more and more fluid in our ascension, more and more graceful and conscious and participatory in our evolution, that what we've previously experienced as, say, heavy phases of depression or prolonged sorrow, that actually what would normally occasion that or trigger that for us, that we have a very different level of responding as our resistance to that core emotion goes, as we choose not to resist, but actually to allow the heart of what is moving, what is occurring within us, to actually happen, that we can experience the core dynamic of the sorrow, which is this profound movement, and thus a much more graceful process of our evolution, of our ascension, being aligned with and becoming our experience. So that's not so different to trying to delete sorrow or override it. And of course, there are moments where there is simply a default, pattern, or we've picked something up. And there are moments when it is about lifting ourselves up from there, and not opening the door into that default or that timeline of that sorrow. There are certainly moments where that is relevant to respond in that way. But like with my experience last week, I checked in with those. It was like testing, is it this? Is it this? Is it something to be cleared? And none of that was the approach. It was neither to be kind of moved from my field, nor was it to be, kind of really, now there's a deep healing that needs to be done. It was, as I say, this becoming one with the feeling of that and the primordial movement of the soul that this is. And the words they gave me were death of the ego. This is a real death of the ego moment, and that's part of what you're moving through. So with that, I was also getting through the night these dreams, repeated dreams that have been coming in, where I experienced some incredible shift point in who I think I am, and a radically different witnessing of my own behavior, and very conscious in the dream that I would normally experience myself behaving a certain way in that kind of scenario, but in the dream bearing witness to myself behaving in a very different way, in a way that's profoundly liberated from that old level of expression. And I've been having that repeat theme in my dream times through this week, correlative with this more daytime sorrow, as the old control patterns that are releasing are felt, the movement of that, the relinquishing, the letting go of that, which is the end of an age. It's the end of an era. For me in my life, of course, in my life expression, but also through the genetics, through lifetimes, what we are releasing, what is fusing out from us is something that, as I say, has been morphing into existence through generations, through tens of thousands of years. And that is felt, that is a movement in the soul as that releases. So it has an epochal quality. It has a sense of an ending that is both personal, but probably bigger than that too. And I think part of in those times, what we feel is, and I know I felt last week, I was very aware that there was, while I was having these night dreams, in my waking consciousness, there was really no sense, almost like a sense of I can't, like I've reached some kind of threshold where I can't go forward. Like there is no movement within my being into this new. The movement within my being, once I synchronized with it, was actually this releasing of these layers, their departure, if you like. And so we can, at these thresholds, which are actually of most profound movement within us, almost have a sensation of like hopelessness, or that things are least changing, which I think is part of the paradox of these passages. And what was so beautiful was, and it's not more beautiful than the bit that came before, but probably my personality prefers it as a level of the experience, which is the fusion, once that process completed itself. And again, this is an intelligence beyond, if you like, my conscious mind, the moment when that resurrection energy came in. And this really distinct, because not etheric, but really embodied, whole new levels of information, of direct, visceral, physical remembering. For me, it's been all about Lemuria, actually, and fusing through my body. I'm in a wave of absolute crystalline, embodied, multidimensional remembrance in this eternal now moment, establishing through my body, that I've absolutely never experienced before. So everything that my body was preparing itself towards was this. And, that's what comes following these times so often. How they say it's darkest before the dawn, or we do have that sense of deepest inertia or hopelessness, or a sense of I can't, or impossibility, either individual or collective. How is, that disbelief, can things ever shift for humanity? Can things ever shift for Earth? A sense of the inertia or the impossibility of moving beyond the current paradigm. And those moments when we experience that can so often be part of the dynamics of what precedes a point of major shift, of absolutely quantum shift, because part of what's happening is the body is about to experience something it's never experienced before. And while as it was coming in, we might have been able to conceptualize it at etheric levels or hold it in consciousness at those levels and be aware of it. And so feel hope, feel excitement, feel like, wow, what's coming in is so amazing. There is a kind of vanishing point as it crosses the threshold and then presents as the new physical experience, where we cannot maintain any perspective on it. And so even our sense of hope can vanish. And we can feel that simply the awareness of the I can't or it isn't. And then what follows? Then what comes in? What comes in for the body beyond all our seeking, all holding on, all resisting of sorrow, or all clinging on to hope? All of this is the actualized new level of experience for the body, the new level of consciousness, the new level of reality coming in. So I wanted to share that in this pod because these passages are so powerful as points of shift. And I know that sometimes I go through them and simply don't go through them with as much conscious grace. You know, they will happen, their power will happen. As long as we're saying that yes, at some level, their power will occur. But if we can harmonize and actually synchronize with the movement of the soul through these passages, then we can have a experience that feels grace-filled, that we are not needing to identify with some of the more emotionally charged interpretations of the phases of that experience, but actually to experience their purer dynamics, their deeper dynamics when we go beyond resistance. So these levels of seeing, these levels of clear seeing, of clear experiencing of our ascension are so natural to us, and they are restoring. And I know too, souls, we often hold, capacities, strengths that are particular to different parts of the cycle. So I've always loved the phase where it's like the new information coming in, but some people have intrinsic, that death or that sorrow cycle is really part of the deep wisdom that is so to the forefront of what you carry or hold. And then this is truly part of the medicine of what you bring for the dawn. And so we all have unique points and gifts in these phases of the soul star. But what's really exciting is our capacity, each one of us, to actually master the wholeness of the cycle itself, that repeats, that is not done once only, but our ascension, that is redefining us infinitely over and over and over again. So much love through this resurrection passage that is enormously powerful. We are changing completely right now. And what we're able to know, to remember, to carry, to be here in our bodies is changing completely. And that is in alignment, however that's expressing within you, it's in alignment with this new state of seventh dimensional star creator presence. It belongs to that knowing in our bodies that we are here creating reality into existence. Our bodies are remembering this, they're restoring into this knowing. And for the body to remember this is truly extraordinary. So with so much love, so many blessings, and I shall see you soon. Farewell for now.